What's up, everyone? This week on the pod, I have Dave Mandel of Indecision Records. And anyone that knows my catalog knows how important Dave is and was to lots of my bands getting released. So he's a super important dude to me, and his history is long and awesome. This podcast is great. We start off with him getting into hardcore and go through him doing a fanzine and then him doing a record label, and I pluck out like a bunch of releases through his catalog, and we talk about them. So this is pretty rad. I hope you enjoy it. Please support the podcast by subscribing to it wherever you listen, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever. Please also give it a like and rate it and review it, again, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you would like to go the extra mile, please go to patreon.com/185 miles south and become a monthly Patreon. These are my personal heroes. They keep the podcast alive by plucking down a little bit of money, and mostly they do it out of the goodness of their heart, but there is also some bonus content back there. We go through the podcasts. There's just extra episodes. So check that out, and let's get on with the pod.
185 miles south. A hardcore punk rock podcast.
What's up, everyone? This week on the pod, I have Dave Mandel of Indecision Records fame. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing good.
Awesome. And yeah, we're going newer school. I could have tried to be the cool guy and said Indecision fanzine, but I only know what I know. So yeah,
we've moved past that.
Yeah. Anyone that listens to the pod weekly knows we had Dave on for one of the questions episodes with Daniel, and we talked about your origin story a little bit there. But for the sake of being a completionist, can you say how you got into punk and hardcore?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a pretty standard story amongst most people, at least maybe people of my age group. I got into skateboarding first. Punk rock was like kind of something that was secondary, kind of came along with skateboarding for me. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't have that like, come to Jesus moment where I was like, punk rock is my life. Like skateboarding was definitely my life. And through that, just, reading Thrasher magazine and seeing all these punk bands, like I'd listen to them because like that's what skateboarders listen to. And at some point, I couldn't really tell you when, it kind of flip-flopped for me. Not that I ever got over skateboarding, but punk rock became the primary and skateboarding the secondary. Probably sometime in, the late 80s or so is really when it kicked in for me. And even though like I listened to music, there's a difference between like listening to punk rock bands and then kind of really absorbing yourself into the culture of punk rock. And I feel like it took me maybe a little bit longer than some people in that sense. Like skateboarding, like I said, that was the culture that I fell in love with first, and punk rock was kind of like my secondary. But that is not the case anymore. I'm all punk rock. I love it. Hardcore. I love it, man.
Yeah, we never knew that you were like, because everyone skateboards, right? But you never know like if someone's good or not. And I remember you came over to our house in South Oxnard in like '04 when we had that half pipe in our backyard, and like you just went on it and totally shredded. We're like, what the fuck? Dave Mandel's really good at skateboarding. What the fuck?
Yeah, even at the Indecision Hotel, which was we were in there from like 97, I think, to 2002, if I remember correctly. It was about 5 years, but we had a skateboard ramp there too.
Did you have a full half pipe?
Yeah, it was a half pipe. I mean, it was a mini ramp. It wasn't like an 8-foot or anything, but it was probably like, it was like a 4 or 5 foot mini.
Yeah, I think ours was only like 4 feet. Some 4 or 5 feet.
Perfect. It's the perfect size, especially at this point in my life. Like I'm not looking to do anything big. I feel like I don't recover quite the same way from a fall.
Yeah, well, I only tried to drop in once and I ate my dick, so that was a wrap. But you got to try, shit. You got to just drop in and hope for magic. Like, maybe I can do this. Nope. But yeah. So, what was the band that like connected you from being like a observer and a listener of the music to like wanting to get more involved?
As far as getting involved, like there's definitely like trigger bands that I had for me. I mean, the first time I heard Minor Threat, I was, that was kind of like an advancement in level. Like this is what I want to be a part of. But as far as like actually being involved, like in the scene, which is what I think you're kind of angling towards, it was really like bands like Youth of Today. That was a big one for me. And I mean, I know that they're still around playing, and maybe in some sense have kind of maybe taken the shine off their name a little bit in that sense, because there's not really any mystery about them. But when Break Down the Walls came out, that was a game changer for me. That was, I want to go to shows every single weekend for the rest of my life. That was the band for me. But I mean, that's not like the first band that I fell in love with. But I feel like that was, maybe it's also just like the timing of how old I was at the time. A driver's license, things like that. Like all those things kind of rolling in a big ball together, kind of made that the moment where I really kind of immersed myself culturally, more than just like going to a show here and there. Like it was, I'm a part of this.
Yeah. When was the first time that you got to see them?
The first time I got to see them was after Break Down the Walls, obviously. Probably when they still had Craig in the band. So that, I don't know if that was the Break Down the Walls tour, or if it was later. But I'd only seen them a couple times. That show, and then they played a show that Ryan Hoffman put on in Pomona the following year at the Yesteryears Club. That's the only two times I ever actually saw them as back in the day. I mean, I've seen them as a reformed band.
What was the club that you said was the first time you saw them?
Fender's Ballroom in Long Beach.
Oh Jesus! So that's fucking epic.
Yeah, I mean, I only went there a handful of times. That was a pretty long trek for me to make it out there, and that was before I had a driver's license. Once I got my driver's license, it didn't. I mean, we went everywhere. We'd drive up to Gilman and, drop of a hat. Yeah,
with so much like riding on Youth of Today, like is them being the band that you really connected with. How did that show deliver for you?
It was pretty surreal. It was also kind of still in an era for me where I was trying to think of a good adjective here, because it wasn't fear or anything like that, but shows still felt scary, so they were kind of overwhelming. So I'm sure I remember the show maybe with a little bit more pizzazz than what it actually, I mean, you might ask the band, they're like, it was kind of like a so-so show. But for me, it was, I couldn't believe it. It was so exciting.
Yeah, I can't imagine how good they would have been in their prime. I mean, I think the first time I saw Ray perform live was when they were doing it would have been, I think, the second time, because I saw Better Than 1,000 the showcase before, and then I think they came out on like that second Rev tour, and I just remember seeing him at the Whiskey, and it was like he was doing like a headstand on like one of the speakers like 5 seconds into their set. I was like, Jesus Christ, this guy's an entertainer. I can't imagine what he would have been like in his prime.
Oh, he was one of the most exciting frontmen, and I mean, I think he's still great. He's still great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I saw him last year and thoroughly loved it. So yeah, but still, jelly of you getting to see him in their prime. I wish. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, so when do you start doing a fanzine?
I had started doing a fanzine with a buddy of mine, Ryan, that I went to high school with. He was like a real shepherd for me into those late 80s, because he seemed to like know a lot more of the bands already, and like he was kind of like an encyclopedia for me. But he actually did the first issue of Indecision with me. We were doing a fanzine before that just didn't materialize, and then the first issue of Indecision, I think we started in like early or this middle of 1990. I think it was early 1990, and then I think we got the zine out like either the end of that year or very beginning of 1991. But it was something like, honestly, I did a fanzine because I had so many pen pals that I would go through like the classifieds in Maximum Rock and Roll every month, and anyone who like posted something, like it didn't matter what it was, like I got T-shirts for trade, or I have a fanzine I'm selling for $1. I would write everybody. You know, that was a big part of the culture for me, was like getting mail from all these, like all over the world, you know, and a fanzine was kind of a thing that helped me be a contributor in that community.
Yeah, I would have barely caught the tail end of that, because like I remember being young and like in the back of MRR, people would like have the little classified with like their record wants and so forth. Mm-hmm. Yeah, super cool. Definitely.
Oh, I mean, era. I was the kind of goober that would like, I would write some of those people if I didn't even know the record. You know, I'm just like, tell me about this record, and people would write you back. You know, like, what? You've never heard the YDI 7-inch? You know, like, and then explain it to me. Its importance, why I should want it. You know, like that's insane.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think of just how much time we waste like on our phones now, like unnecessarily checking social media or playing Candy Crush or whatever the fuck, you know, it's like that stuff is way more constructive and way more entertaining. Like I would rather, you know, I mean, that's why I enjoy doing this podcast. I like to talk about hardcore music. You know, it's no different than wanting to correspond with another like-minded person when you don't have that many people to talk to about it. You know, and even on this platform where there are a fair amount of people, it's like, it's still super niche, you know, like this genre of music.
Yeah.
So how many issues do you do of Indecision?
I did 5 full issues, and then I think there was either 2 or 3 like half issues that were, you know, basically like an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, like folded up, you know, like one little, like, I mean, a glorified flyer, which I had actually gotten the idea from Fred Hammer of, because he had done a little newsletter called like Bethink, I think it was called. Does that ring any bell with you? But he did like a little newsletter that wasn't like It's Alive. I'm not really sure why. I might be remembering that incorrectly, but for some reason I feel like I remember that. And so like Indecision, like in between, I don't know, like issue 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 or something like that. Like I would do like a little half scene, because I mean they didn't come out very often. I mean it was basically like a year-end yearbook. You know, I'd do them like once a year.
Sure. Yeah, much later in the mid '90s, he did like a little newsletter called Localism that was like, if I remember right, it would be like an 11 by 17, maybe just folded. So it would be like it'd be a 4-pager. But yeah, I don't really remember that well. But so in '92, you decided to make the jump and actually put a record out. What was like the impetus of that? Was it just like you were bros with a band and it was like the right time, or had you been wanting to do a record for a while and now you found the right project? Or
I don't think I really put out a record because I wanted to do a record label. I kind of feel like I wanted to do a record label after I had done a record, is when I really realized that how much I enjoyed it. But as far as like the first record, the path to that's existence was that Strife had recorded a 7-inch for New Age. And this was like at a time where Mike was super busy. I mean, I want to say it like all like within like a month of each other, or 2 months of each other. Like Strife had recorded an EP, Mean Season had recorded an EP, Unbroken recorded an EP, Outspoken recorded the LP, and various other things that he had kind of going in the works. And their record was either going to get like pushed back for a while. And I mean, they had been playing on a demo for a while. They really wanted to have a record out. And Mike kind of told them that like it might not come out as quickly as you're hoping it's going to. And then I know at some point there was talk about it possibly even being a cassette single. That was like a popular thing. Like at the time, like Outspoken had done one. Conversion had done ones with like Stone Telling, and the Integrity had like a cassette single. So it was like kind of like in the scene, people were doing these cassette singles. And I think there was some like disappointment even in the idea of, with the band, Strife being a cassette single. It ended up not turning out that way, so it didn't really matter. But Sid Neeson, their drummer, asked me, he said, hey, would you be into helping me put out our own 7-inch? I was like, yeah, of course, I'd love to do it. So we quickly went into the studio and recorded at the same studio that the Outspoken LP, the Mean Season 7-inch, the Unbroken were all recorded at, which was a terrible studio looking back. Legendarily terrible recordings, but it was cheap and it was quick and we could get it done. And then at some point throughout the process, Sid kind of went to me and he's like, it feels like you kind of want to take the reins on this and kind of do it on your own. I was like, I kind of do. I don't want that to bum you out. And he's like, no, I don't want to run a record label. I want you to do it. So he kind of like pushed me into that direction. He kind of gave me the project to do, helped me get it started, and then kind of, be on your own, go do this. And then after that, I was hooked. I was like, I love this. Even with the fanzine, it was always something I did because I wanted to be involved. I'm not really musically talented, and I have no problem being, somebody in the back helping things get done. And record label offered me that opportunity.
Yeah, can you compare the satisfaction of like finishing a zine and having it out compared to like having some of those early 7-inches finished and coming out?
I don't know if I would say like one feels better than the other. But that first time you actually get that record in your hands is pretty special. With like a fanzine, you're doing layouts, while you're making this. So you already have like a visual of this is what it looks like, With a record, that's not the case. You're turning in artwork, and at that time, I was doing paste up artwork, and then we'd like shoot it with the camera to make the film. We were like computer layouts for it. So there was a little bit of that mystery, but or not mystery, I should say. But to get that record the first time, even today, like, I'm almost 30 years into Indecision, and whenever I get that record, I'm so excited to like rip that shrink wrap off and look at it. Yeah, it's exciting still. Like that buzz hasn't gone away, and there's a real sense of accomplishment with it because it's a lot of little things that have to happen for that thing to come out.
Yeah, and there's also like it's a staggered satisfaction and excitement too, because like that excitement of getting the test presses is really cool too, and also the nervousness of playing it the first time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely like a sense of accomplishment, only because, yeah, like you said, it's a step-by-step journey. So by the time you get to the end and it's holding your hand and that journey's over, there's definitely like a huge sense of relief and accomplishment.
Yeah, I love it, and I like how you said it. Like, it just never gets old. It never does.
It never does.
Hasn't for me either.
I know, that's maybe not the experience that, everyone that's done a record label has had, but as far as I'm concerned, if that's not your experience at the end of that little journey for each record, then you're doing the wrong thing. You got to go do something else.
Yeah, for sure. What is the story behind the Mandel Kentucky cover?
So like you said, things got put together staggered. So we got the recording done, and we knew that all we needed to get labels done so that we could turn it into the pressing plant, and then we'd get covers made and we'll put it all together. So things got done in very long steps. So the record was done, it was turned in, we had test presses, it was approved, and it went to the plant. And the pressing times weren't quick, but better than the turnaround than vinyl's been in the last 5 years or so. And we got records, and kind of realized like, oh, we haven't finished a layout for the cover. I had done a back cover, but we still hadn't had a front cover. We weren't sure what we wanted to put on it. And Andrew suggested, he's like, well, we want something we could, sell at shows. So I said, okay, well, there's 200 on green. We'll just make a different cover for the green one. And, we're not really sure. Let's just find a photo and we'll just put it and Xerox copy them. And Andrew's like, okay, we should call it Mandel Can Suck It. And I was like, kind of like laughed at the idea. So, I mean, it wasn't, it's a little bit of a jab at me for not getting that cover done in time, but, it was all done in good faith. It might have been Sid that came up with that idea, but for some reason I feel like it was Andrew. But yeah, it was a playful jab. I mean, I sold them, like I mail ordered those things. So it's not something that was bothering me.
Yeah, and for the people listening, it's obviously a play off the Judge.
The Chunk King Can Suck It, yeah. And right around that time, Jamie Billig, old Santa Barbara scenester, had put out a 10-inch bootleg of Chunk King Can Suck It called Revelation Can Suck It. So and then Unit Pride, there was like a alternate cover of them that said Jason Bush Could Suck It. So it was kind of like I don't know, a meme before memes existed.
Yeah, inside hardcore joke. So before we jump kind of into the catalog here, I'd like you to kind of go into okay, so Strife wanted a 7-inch out so bad. Can you kind of explain how big of a deal it was for a band to get a record out? Because I remember even doing my first record, The Voice of Defiance 7-inch, how big of a deal it felt to be on vinyl. It was because it's a harder barrier of entry. Back then it was a little harder to put a 7-inch out, I think, because now you can go to one place and they can take care of everything for you. I remember how daunting it was doing the first 7-inch. Okay, you got to record it somewhere. They put it on this format that you've never seen before that you can't listen to. You got to turn that in somewhere. You got to get a different guy to master it for vinyl. You got to get labels somewhere else. You got to get your covers somewhere else. All these things, and hope that they all tie together and get sent to the plant. So it was kind of a wild process, but it was a big deal to get put onto vinyl. Don't you think that's why Strife wanted it so bad compared to a tape?
Oh, for sure. And maybe it's not the case now, because now it feels like vinyl might just be that's a product, something for us to sell on Bandcamp, but what we really want to do is get our stuff onto streaming platforms or whatever it might be in a modern nomenclature. But having a record, even then, in the early 90s, felt like a big accomplishment that not every band could do. So it was kind of like a little bit of a separator. Every band could do a demo tape, there's no barrier of entry there. But to actually have a record that you or someone else actually has to spend a bunch of money to get done, that's a much bigger deal, and they love records too. And to be able to have a record that's you on there playing, it seemed insane back then. I mean, for us at that age, people were making records forever, but for us at, at the end of our teens, that was still a huge wow moment to be able to be on a record. Because that's something that they could take to their parents going, look, we're in a band that we did a record.
Yeah, you could show your grandma,
Yeah.
It's impressive, because it's that's how music was taken at the time. I mean, by then there's CDs and there's tapes, but like you said, it's just, I don't know, it was there's a lot more goes into putting out a record or a CD. The CD's big too at the time. But, but yeah, super, super cool. I wanted to talk about the Blackout 7-inch, because that must have been pretty rad for you to do, because you're a big Blast fan. How did that come about? Did you reach out to them, or what was going on with them at the time?
They had done a couple of Blast demos without Cliff. And I was living in New Jersey at the time, and I was talking on the phone with Fred Hammer, Sorry. And we were talking about like, what's Blast doing? You know, I mean, that's a worship band for me. They could literally record feedback and I would have put it out. You know, there was not much in the way of like real expectations. I was just excited to be a part of anything with those guys. And Fred said that, yeah, Mike has a band. I mean, it's that same Blast band, but they're changing the name to Blackout, and they looking for someone to help them do a 7-inch. And so really Fred was the middleman that kind of brought that to me. And I was just like, yeah, I'm in. I'm absolutely in. And I had been planning on moving back to California anyways. But that was honestly something that kind of lit the fire under me. Like, yeah, I need to be back in California. I need to, you know, this like East Coast vacation is done for me. It's time for me to get back home and start working on stuff. But it was pretty exciting. And it was really exciting too. After the record came out, they played a show in, it's the little town just outside of Palm Springs. Can't remember what it's called. But for some reason they got like a show there. And they said, hey, we're going to drive down from Santa Cruz for this show. We're going to stop in Huntington Beach, pick you up, and take you to the show. And like, even just like riding in the van, you know, like, oh my God, I'm like with the guys from Blast, you know, like, and they're seriously some of the most awesome dudes. And like, we were driving along and we saw like a skate ramp on the side of the road. They're like, oh, we should have brought our boards. And I kind of like looked at them like, we should have. Why didn't we bring our boards? I was like, so freaking excited. You know, it was so awesome. But yeah, that band was just untouchable for me. And I feel like they're a band like mostly for people I think that didn't have like a local connection to them. When people like try to write them off as like, oh, they were doing the Black Flag thing, but like, no, screw that. They were doing Black Flag better than Black Flag could do Black Flag. They were untouchable. But yeah. It was pretty exciting for me because even that record was probably like 2 years almost after the Strife 7-inch. It wasn't like back to back. So I'd kind of put out that Strife record, and it was kind of like, okay, I did it. You know, like the idea of running a record label wasn't even like an idea yet. It wasn't until like the Blackout thing happened that I went like, oh, this is now a series. This is a catalog. It's only 2 records, but you know, it's not just like helping to put out my friend's band.
Yeah, and that gives you a certain amount of confidence because there's a certain level of acting professional you have to do when it's not your friend's band. You know, like a little more pressure. So, but yeah, I love that 7-inch. I think it's rad. And that's funny that you bring up them playing like a town out of Palm Springs because they always ended up kind of playing random spots. I remember when they were doing the band Lab. That's like the only time I ever went to a show in San Clemente.
That was the same. Lab was the same band. It was Blackout.
Yeah. They changed the name again. Now, so was Lab Life After Blackout or Life After Blast?
I think it was Life After Blast, but yeah, it was basically Blackout's. I think there might have been another band called Blackout, and they just didn't want to deal with it. If I might be remembering that incorrectly, but I feel like that was the way it played out.
Yeah, both those 7-inches are sick. I love them. So you do the Collateral Damage 7-inch, and I love Collateral Damage. I think that they're one of the most underrated bands, at least California in the 90s. You do the first 7-inch. Does New Age does the second one, or is that vice versa?
Yes, New Age did the second one. And there's definitely a story there, but yeah, I did that was right after I moved to Orange County, and I hung out with Chris Lohman a lot when I first moved out there, and he basically brought the project to me. He's like, hey, I'm doing a band where I'm going to sing, and I want you to put it out. I was like, okay, let's do it. I mean, he was the band, you know, he basically just got friends to be like, okay, you're going to be the guitar player, you're going to be the bass player. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, Pape from Farside was playing drums, you know, like it's an odd mix. Like when you think of what Collateral Damage ended up being later, you know?
Yeah, they're super cool. I mean, their best song is the next thing I want to talk about, which is the comp you put together. I think it's the best song on the comp. The Redemption 87 song is very close. But you told me to hold, so good, you know, just the way it comes in. What's the idea for doing a comp? And And how daunting was it putting it together?
It actually changed forms a couple times. The idea for doing the comp was I don't think I was ready at that point to like commit to like doing, or not even commit, taking the responsibility for doing a band's full length release. That seemed like such a huge jump from doing the 7 inches that I was doing. So I thought a comp would be a great way to kind of ease my way in as my first 12-inch release. And originally it was just going to be a comp. I talked to a few bands that said no, and a few bands that were down to do it. And then kind of as I started kind of looking for, like I'd say, oh, you're doing a comp. Hey, do you have space for us? It ended up being so many local bands that it's like the 3 or 4 out-of-state bands, I don't know, kind of almost felt out of place at that point. And that's kind of when I switched it to being like a California comp. And there was a lot of stuff going on at the time. So I thought it was like a good moment in time for me to do that. It's a good snapshot of what the scene locally at least looked like in 1995. But there was no like special intention behind it besides me really wanting to do an LP record, but not having what I thought was going to be a huge responsibility of handling someone's full length.
Yeah, it is such an interesting snapshot, and what a strange time. I mean, like the sounds are just all over the place. It's pretty crazy.
I mean, it's interesting because I've listened to like some of the pods that like you and Daniel and Stu and episode 1 will do about like early 90s stuff. And you guys will talk about it in like a reverence where like, oh, there was so much good music coming out at this time. And like that 1990, 91, 92, like I actually felt the opposite at the time. Like the late 80s had just kind of died off, which were like so many of the bands that I loved, or they got really embarrassing that you didn't want to like them anymore. And there kind of was nothing to like take its place. So you kind of had all these people from hardcore bands not wanting to do the kind of, by the numbers hardcore. So they kind of tried to branch out. Some of them were complete and total failures. Some of them I think were a little magical. But I mean, it's not like the scene was at an all-time high at that time. I didn't really listen to a lot of mainstream stuff. So I, like a lot of like the big radio bands, I really knew nothing about it. I was tuned out. I only listened to hardcore. But I kind of feel like it's an interesting area because I feel like it was a rebirth area. The only people that were really still around in those early 90s are people that really wanted to be involved in hardcore. Anyone that was there because it was like the thing you do with my other high school friends, like they were all gone. So it kind of felt like, all the real people were there still.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, because you grab a lot of like the weird stuff, but then you still have Ignite, Redemption 87, Collateral Damage, and the song that stood out to me, and I remember hating this band, was the Parade's In song. I just listened to this comp again, and I fucking love that song. And I remember seeing them and just hating it. And maybe it was because, I'm just closed-minded, like, oh, it's a band like the guitarist sings, and they're playing kind of hardcore music, and, kind of in like that
I think the Parade's End that was on the comp was not, because when it was the guitar player singer, that was actually Jay Hansel later on.
Different type of band.
Yeah. The lineup for that comp, that was the only time that it was basically that band, most of the guys from that band Remain, that Igby had put out with someone else singing. And they recorded 2 songs. So there's one other song that they never put out, and I didn't use it for the comp, but there was 2 songs in that session. But that's the only time that lineup was a band. So it's like, kind of funny because like they did 7 inches and stuff like that later, but it was essentially a completely different band.
Yeah, I just remember they were like a band that would play the Pickle Patch, and I was like, ugh. Like
they were definitely pickle patchers.
Yeah, but the song of your comp rules, and then I was totally eating crow listening to it like last week. I was like, fuck, this is good. Like I was a dick. So thanks for making me feel a little better. So yeah, one of the next things you do that is pretty important to the history of Indecision Records is you do the Instant 7-inch in 1996. And looking at these things in the timeline, I'm always shocked because like, your memory is not, it's never perfect. And you look back at stuff.
Oh, mine's terrible.
Yeah, and like the timeline of things is weird. Like, the Life's Halt 7-inch came out in 98. And I always picture them in like the group of like the year 2000 bands, and it's like, whoa, they predate it by like 2 years. And 2 years, like, in the scheme of a lifetime isn't shit, but it feels like hardcore, at least in like the 90s, it feels like every year is like almost a lifetime from the next one. And looking at like this, looking at this Instant 7-inch for 96, it's really early, and I'm thinking that maybe they don't get the credit they deserve for playing like an old style of hardcore, like kind of in the dark time for that. Like, like it would get popular like the next year or 97, 98. But this is a 7-inch 96, and they're playing like a very straightforward style of hardcore. How did you meet these guys, and how do you feel about the 7-inch?
I actually met Ensign's like a band that I kind of consider in two parts, at least that original lineup that's on that first 7-inch. I had met the guys in Ensign. I was visiting someone on the East Coast, and the drummer had a house, 67 Handy Street, where they used to do shows like in the basement. And we went to go see a show there, and I ended up hanging out with all those guys several times over that week that I was out there, and they gave me an Ensign demo, maybe the day before I went home, and I listened to it, and it was cool. I dug it. It was really different. It did not have Tim Shaw singing. It was a different singer. But I was, it was kind of already on my radar. Like, they're really good people, and it's kind of an interesting band. I like that demo. It doesn't sound like what Ensign ended up becoming, but it was definitely something I took notice of. And then maybe the year prior to that, I had gone out selling merch with Strife on a Sick of It All tour, on the Scratch the Surface tour. And Tim Shaw was Sick of It All's roadie. And, you go on a tour with somebody for a month or a month and a half or however long that tour was, you kind of become friends. We kept in touch a lot after the tour was over. And he calls me out of the blue one day and says, "Hey, man, I got a band I'm doing." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, tell me about it." He's all, "It's called Ensign." I was like, "Wait, I saw an Ensign in New Jersey." And he's like, "Oh, no, I'm singing for that band." I was like, "Oh, that's crazy." So, like, it basically had this mishmash of two different groups of people that I had met separately, kind of came together in this band. And I was like, "Man, I'm interested. Let's do it." But that's kind of how the band came to me. It wasn't like I saw them with Tim and was like, "Hey, let's do it." Like, I actually knew Tim completely separate from those guys, and it was actually kind of surprising. I was like, "How does Tim even know these people?" Like, they seem like very different social circles, Tim was hanging out with, like, the Alleyway Crew guys, and, these guys were, hanging out in basements watching Garden Variety play.
Maybe that's why they were interesting. Maybe that's why they were, like, they ended up being a cool mishmash of dudes. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really cool. And then, obviously, if you can follow, like, from release to release, it was like an ever-changing lineup, especially in those early years until they kind of got, like, the combination that really worked for them.
Yeah, and so going through your catalog here, Dave, I'm generally picking out like the first release of bands. So if you have anything else to say on Instant, you should say it before I move on.
Okay.
But yeah, they did a full length, which was like a great Indecision release. Came out, I don't have it in front of me, but probably a couple years after the 7-inch, because they do 2 7-inches and then do an LP, if I remember correctly.
It came out. It came out the following year. It came out in '97. Okay. The second 7-inch they did was actually because because of like, Tim's connection to Sick of It All and a lot of those like New York bands, there was a label in Japan that really wanted to put out a Japanese version of the Ensign EP, but they didn't want to do an EP. Like it's not worth it for them to license. They wanted to have like a full length worth of songs, like a CD only. So we kind of, after talking to them, like, all right, they need like 4 more songs. So they basically went and recorded 4 songs to be the bonus tracks on this Japanese CD so that it could come out. And since we had already recorded, we were just kind of like, let's just put it out as a 7-inch here. Like it was never in like an intended 7-inch. It's just kind of by function, it ended up existing. I mean, we were already like looking towards a full length by then. But that full length was a big deal for me too. That was the first like kind of what I would consider a higher budget record that I had done.
Yeah, and what was the feeling going into that? Did you feel a lot of pressure?
A little bit, because I mean, Ensign was working hard. Like they were touring a lot, and I mean, losing a lot of money too, for both of us. But going into that full length, it was kind of like this gonna be my first, not real record. That's not the right word to say, but kind of like my first big release. I mean, they were recording at Tracks East, which was like kind of like the hot studio at the time. It was the recording was more expensive than anything I had done it to that point. I mean, by probably like 10 times, and, we got it mastered at this place. And, it felt like we did the things that like a Victory Records would have done at that time,
Mm-hmm.
and it maybe something that was like, there was a little intrepidation on my part in the sense that it's just like a bigger thing that I'm equipped to handle. But it ended up not being the case.
Is you stepping from like kind of doing like a hobby label to like possibly doing a real contender record label?
Yeah, I mean, that record also, it's not just like when you put out a 7-inch, it just kind of feels like we got this 7-inch out, here you go, let's do this. With like a full length like that, there was a lot of other moving parts that we were trying to get into place. We had advertising budgets, and all the ads had to get done on a certain timeline so that they're in time for the release date. We got to get all the tour stuff scheduled and set up, and trying to get a band that doesn't actually have their full length out yet on a decent tour is not easy. You got to hear no 30 times before you hear that one yes, and it can be daunting.
Yeah, and then you got to get the record out in time before the tour.
Yeah, exactly, and hope that you can get it into stores. That's distribution. Distribution is difficult. That used to be the thing that sunk everybody. I don't think that's necessarily the case for labels now. Like distribution's almost kind of like the extra credit. Like if you get a good web presence and get streaming and all in line and all that kind of stuff, you can do stuff a little bit more on the cheap, but that record was a huge investment for me. It's not just like, I made enough money that came in off the Collateral Damage 7-inch that I can afford this Ensign recording. That was my savings. That was like everything that I had earned, working my job for the last 5 years before that. It was scary. It was a commitment. It was drawing a line in the sand saying, I'm either doing this or I'm not.
Right. And in the end, did it recoup?
It did. The band didn't recoup. They spent an insane amount of money on their short tenure on Indecision, but the record itself recouped.
Yeah, that's cool. Did you feel weird when they left the label? Like, was that a thing or no?
It was pretty heartbreaking, that it felt like a breakup. I mean, I know that some people can, when you hear people say things like, it's not show friendship, it's show business or something like that. It's just like the most just gross things. I can't picture, and I can't put music in hardcore music in terms like that. Like this, I put out records by bands that I like, and people that I like, and people that I would want to hang out with, and people that I want to support. So to have a band like Ensign leave the way they did was pretty heartbreaking. We ended up, the friendships were probably better for it in the long run. But it was a shock to my system a little bit. I tried to talk them out of it. I didn't think, and not being selfish, like, oh, I want you to stay on Indecision, but like, I don't think this is the right move for your band. I didn't think it was. I think that that was proved correct. I think a lot of the core community turned on them a little bit.
Yeah. What was the benefit that they saw of going to Nitro? Would it just be there's more of a budget?
Well, and also they got to kind of restart their band debt. They were really my only band when they were on Indecision, my only full-time band. So like every penny I made went towards Ensign stuff, and a full-time touring band is expensive for everyone involved. And okay, we need a tour van. I bought them a tour van. The van's tires are bald. We need to buy new tires. I bought them new tires. Like, hey, we need a bunch of merch for this tour. Okay, I'll get all the merch done. And then, you hope that maybe you'll get paid back something at the end of the tour. But they're going out as like a support. Even though they're getting good tours, they're going out as a support. They're getting paid $100 a show, and then whatever merch they can sell, they're not making enough money to pay off the bills for all the things that we had to pay for going into it. So with every tour, even though it was better for them and maybe it would make them they would get their name out a little bit more, it was just deeper and deeper into debt. And it wasn't coming back the other way. It didn't matter how many records the album sold, because it wasn't going to bring in enough money to counterbalance how much actual band debt they were building up. And really the thing, I mean, there's a couple different things. Probably it depends on who you ask in the band. But the way it really played out was the band was offered a full European tour with Sick of It All, which at the time, that's a huge tour. But the catch was Sick of It All was going to require them to share the tour bus. So on those MAD tours, we could go get our own van, pay for a driver, and it's, even on like support money, like it's doable. But they were going to get support money, plus we were going to have to pay for half the tour bus up front. So before we bought plane tickets to even get them to Europe, we were going to have to cut a check for the tour bus, which was, probably $12,000, $13,000, which I didn't have. Like, I didn't have that kind of money. I couldn't empty out any more bank accounts. It wasn't there. Like, I wasn't going to be able to come up with it. So there was a conversation we had about that where they, you know how it is. Like when you get that carrot dangled in front of your face, you feel like this might be the only opportunity. This is the only time they're ever going to ask us to go to Europe. We have to do this now. Where I was kind of like, well, let's think of something else for this first European tour and then see if Sick of It All will take you next year, Sure. And they felt like that they were kind of under the gun, like it's now or never. And I was like, man, well, it's going to have to be never. Like, I don't know how I can do this. And they had ended up talking to someone at Nitro, not even about getting picked up or anything like that. They were just friends with them, because, they had done tours with AFI and that sort of stuff and a bunch of those other bands. And Nitro basically made an offer to bring them on board. And even though they had no record ready at all, they would pay for the Sick of It All European tour. So they were just going to give them $13,000 or however much. It might have even been more than that, right off the bat to go on this European tour, and then they would come back and do the record. So they kind of felt like that was what they had to do. And it was hard for me to kind of argue it, like I don't have the money to say, well, I'll pay for it. If this is your only option, I guess you guys got to do what you got to do, even though it bums me out. I don't want to absorb that. I mean, it would have been crushing for me if I would have had to absorb another $13,000 debt. Sure. And they were already in debt up to their eyeballs. And really, as much of it was kind of a heartbreak that I wasn't going to do the next record because I had put so much into pushing that band, like that the next record would be the one that like hopefully this one will pay off a little bit more because like the name's already established, people will be anticipating it. But that's just the way it played out. No band is worth losing friendships over, so I had to kind of suck it up and understand that this is how they felt and this is what they want to do, even if I didn't think it was the correct decision. You guys go and do it. The only caveat I had was, please just help me pay off your band debt before you do the next record with Nitro. And that was the only thing I asked, which they never did.
Yeah, that's hard. Hard to have that noodles carrot dangled in front of you and turn away from it.
And I kind of had a similar conversation with Death by Stereo. I don't know if that's something that you want to wait to get to, but there's kind of a conversation that ties into that scenario. Is that I had done that first Death by Stereo record, and when Ensign left, kind of in the manner that they did, it felt like people around me were more bummed about it. I was bummed about it, but they were more angry about it. And I remember Paul saying, like, we would never do something like that. And then record 2, Epitaph wants to sign him, and I want my friends to do it. That's a huge one, like that wasn't the same as Nitro. I was never impressed with what Nitro was as a record label. But Epitaph was like a big deal, and that was going to be a big deal for Death by Stereo. And those guys are my friends. Like, I want them to do that record. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But Paul kind of felt guilty a little bit because he was like, we would never, that's so fucked up that Ensign did that. And then literally the next record, they get offered Epitaph, And both of those bands, like, that was still the days of, multi-record contracts. Both of those bands were in contract. I had to let them go, I could have been a jerk and said, no, you have to do this. But why would I want to do a record by a band who wants to do it with someone else? That makes no sense. But Death by Stereo made sure that, Epitaph took care of me a little bit, not necessarily just financially, but like just in a good relationship. They let me do the vinyl versions of it. They basically paid for me to put out an EP for Death by Stereo beforehand. Like Epitaph, I don't know what other what bands' relationships have been with that record label. I'm sure that there's a spectrum. Man, Epitaph was fantastic to me. Brett Gurwitz is a stand-up dude as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the second record was on Epitaph. I thought that was the third one. But
yeah, I did the vinyl for the Epitaph did the second and third records. I did the vinyl for both of those, as well as the EP right before the second record. And then by the time the last Epitaph record, so that would have been their fourth LP, kind of came around, like vinyl was just really a difficult sell, so they just didn't do a vinyl version of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to get to actually both those things. Although we don't have to get to Death by Stereo anymore. Although we can say how big they were. It was pretty mind-blowing. Like, they came out and their sound was like nothing else, and they blew up out the gate.
And they should have. That first record was, I'd say, genre-defining, if there was a genre that like sprung up after them, but nobody could really kind of do what they did, so there wasn't really like a scene that that was copycats of them. But that first record is unlike anything else I put out. I feel like it was unlike anything that was coming out at the time, and I still think it sounds unlike anything that comes out now. It was a pretty unique record.
Yeah, which was so cool that it caught on, because it was wild sounding. The combination of Jim being like one of the greatest guitarists on earth, plus Ephraim singing like no one else, like, can't touch it, So
yeah, that record is special.
Yeah, I wish I liked it. I
you don't like it, really?
No, I would see them and be like, God, this band is fucking awesome. Like, they're one of those bands like you watch and you know how awesome they are, and I respected it, and I liked all the guys, and it's just like it doesn't resonate with me. I always thought I would be the guy that like got into him on the third record, and it just it never really happened. But I always just knew, I was like, I'd see them and people are going nuts, and it's like, this band is so great live. I wish I loved them, like I want to be a part of this, and it never touched me like that. I don't know why. So let's go back a year before that,
Okay.
because I want to talk about Adamantium. I think this is a band kind of like forgotten history now, because they're a heavy band and they were fucking huge for Southern California. And so you do their LP from the depths of depression, '98, and then like they kind of tie in. It's that whole thing. This is like when you're really like Indecision gets going. You do the Adamantium, you do the Throwdown, you do the Death by Stereo, and like it's like all these bands can fucking headline Showcase. Like these are like hot times. So let's talk about Adamantium a little bit, and how do you feel about this band? How do you feel about this record? And where do you think they fit into history now, like looking back on it?
As far as the record, I kind of feel in a similar way to it as I did about the Death by Stereo. I was never really much of like a metal guy. Like, you know, when I kind of found punk, I was into things that sounded punk. You know, there's like the handful of guilty pleasures that you have out there. I mean, the first time you hear Slayer, it's undeniable and things like that. But for the most part, I wasn't really well aware of a lot of different metal influences that they were probably pulling from. So it was like fresh music to me. And I don't think anyone really sounded like what they were playing, at least on that first record. But more than anything, they were kind of like the spark that kind of started that little Orange County fire. You know, the 18
Totally.
Visions and Bleeding Through and Throwdown and, you know, the stuff that, you know, ended up being popular for Trustkill for the next few years after them. They were kind of like the unsung heroes that kind of were the first of those. Right. And they're not. Yeah, they're probably not remembered in as high of a context as, you know, I personally remember them. But the people who were at Showcase in the late '90s and got to see Adamantium, I mean, they can tell you, you know, it was unlike, it was insane. Like the reactions they would get, it was like unlike any other band I'd ever seen before, including Bad Brains didn't get a reaction that Adamantium would get at a hometown show at Showcase. It was crazy. It was a perfect mix for them. Perfect timing.
And 18 Visions predates them, right? But Throwdown and Bleeding Through come after.
I don't know if the name 18 Visions predates them. Like some of the 18 Visions guys had a band called Macabre before that. Okay. And Adamantium was actually, when they first started, less of kind of like the metal-y stuff that they played in Adamantium. They were in a band called Collapse, and they actually, I saw them play once, and that was in '95. So that, I think that predates probably 18 Visions. But it was sort of the same band. But I remember they played like a New Year's Eve house show in Long Beach with Mouthpiece.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's kind of weird when you think of like what they were later, but yeah, and Macabre, I think maybe it was only James that was in the shared members in that, but I feel like Macabre kind of turned into 18 Visions, but I don't really know their history that well, but they were around the same time.
Okay, yeah, so 18 Visions beats them by a year, at least in LPs. So that the one that came out on Life Sentence, that I think that's a Salt Lake label, the Lifeless record. That comes out in '97. So
okay,
yeah.
When does the Adamantium 7-inch come out?
Oh, now we're relying on my slow ass computer. It took 10 seconds to pull up 18 Visions. I'll pull it up.
Yeah, but they're probably right around the same time. I mean, you know, give or take, you know, 6 to 8, 12 months.
I saw 18 Visions at the time, and they were like a respectable local band. But like I think that what you said is probably correct. Like Adamantium really lit that spark that like blew up the scene, so all those bands would blow up.
Yep.
So maybe that's the legacy, and I think that's kind of rad, because even if they aren't, I think that the other three bands get talked about more and kind of are more remembered that like
Well,
there's no shame.
they also got to do more. You know, Adamantium, you know, they kind of flamed out kind of early. You know, even though they had, you know, they did a second record, you know, a couple years later, it wasn't quite the same lineup. It wasn't the same mixture of ingredients, you know, and sometimes that hurts.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. The Adamantium 7-inch is 97 that's on Chase's label, right? Prime Directive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Well, sick. And then in 99 you do the first Throwdown record, and again, so like the scene is ready for Throwdown. They're pretty big out the gate. They do a 7-inch before Beyond Repair, correct?
They do. Beyond Repair was actually supposed to be the CD version of the 7-inch. They put out they recorded a 7-inch and a demo at the same time. So like half the songs came out on a vinyl 7-inch, the other half were like on a cassette demo. And I had been talking with Dom, and Dom's like, "Man, I really wish it was on CD. And would you be interested in doing it?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it. I'll put it out on CD." And then fast forward like a week, maybe after talking to everybody in the band, they were like, "Let's just re-record all the songs for the CD." So that's kind of how Beyond Repair came. It wasn't like, "Hey, let's do an LP." It was like, "Let's just do a version of your 7-inch and demo onto CD." So it was almost instantaneous. You know, it was like that stuff came out, they were already recording the Beyond Repair.
Yeah, and they're huge out the gate, right?
Probably not right out the gate. You know, a lot of the early shows, you know, they were obviously a very tongue-in-cheek band. Some of that history is probably lost to time, you know, as far as what the popular version of them ended up being. But, you know, they were called Throwdown. You know, like everyone in the band was like 5'5" and under. You know, is like they loved Hatebreed. They just wanted to write breakdowns and write silly lyrics, and you know they'd have friends dress up like ring card girls and hold like song number 1 sign and walk in front of them while they played. You know what I mean? And just do silly stuff like that. And you know, I sometimes like those lighthearted, you don't have to take it serious bands will catch on with people when everything else is kind of taking themselves really seriously. And that's kind of what happened with Throwdown. But once Beyond Repair came out, once that switch kind of clicked, you know, and maybe Beyond Repair kind of changed the image of them being like the jokey joke band that played first on some show to being like a headliner with an album. That's probably the case. But when it turned over big. Like they were like the fun band to go see at Showcase. You knew it was going to be crazy.
Yeah, Throwdown was huge, and I hate to say it, Dave, but I love the third album the most, and that's the one.
Haymaker.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously the record when they. I mean, I you don't have to be Blood is like truly their first album. You know, like I said, Beyond Repair was kind of. It was almost like a greatest hits compilation before a band should have a greatest hits compilation. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, it's just kind of like a mishmash of those songs, like just to get them done onto a CD. And You Don't Have to Be Led is like that's the first Throwdown album. And it sounds a lot different, I think, than Beyond Repair. And then a lot of those songs that ended up on Haymaker, they had written, you know, with Keith singing. I think they even recorded a lot of those songs. There's versions like on comps and stuff like that. But when Dave switched, you know, Dave became like kind of the guiding force when he became the singer, and he wanted to do a serious band, and he did. You know, it changed. I don't know, changed the concept of what that band originally was. You know, whether you like the newer version or the older version doesn't really matter, but it felt like a different band. You know, Dave, it wasn't writing jokes anymore.
Yeah. He's just a really good singer, and the production on the album is insane, and the drumming, supposedly like but I always heard that Jared, like, he learned it in one practice and went and nailed it. Do you know if that's true?
Probably. I don't know if that's specifically true, but it wouldn't shock me. You know, I mean, he's a prodigy when it comes to drumming. I do remember when he'd gone to the Berklee School of Music, and when he was living in Boston, he was kind of like the go-to studio drummer. So like he ended up playing on like an American Nightmare record and a Hope Conspiracy record. And I think it was Hope Conspiracy he might have done first. And, you know, there was no talk about him being a permanent part of the band. Like he's basically helping them out on the recording because he loves to record. And, you know, he did his Jared Stereo kind of drum fills and what have you. And they thought it would be easy to find a drummer that could just like play that stuff, you know, for the live show. And it wasn't. So I know when he recorded American Nightmare, I'm pretty sure Tim went to him and said, hey, we need this. Like, if you're not going to join the band, you need to play stuff that someone else is going to be able to play. Otherwise, it just looks like you're cheating it every time live. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's so wild.
But yeah, Jared's, I mean, it's insane. I mean, that was like the other thing with Death by Stereo and that first lineup, you know, like
that's right,
so much of that unique stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Didn't he do a Vandals tour and get ripped off?
I don't know I don't know about any of that sort of stuff, but he definitely played with the Vandals, which is crazy when you think of like a band of like what the Vandals are. Like they've had some of the best drummers in punk play in that band, you know?
Yeah.
Josh Freese, Jared Stereo, Brooks Wackerman, like they've had really good people play.
Yeah, I wonder how they would come on his radar, or how he would come on their radar. It's interesting. Go ahead.
I mean, yeah, Joe Escalante from the Vandals was definitely familiar with Death by Stereo. He was actually our acting lawyer for Indecision and Death by Stereo with when they signed to Epitaph.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay. In the year 2000, you do something pretty unique that a fair amount of labels have done since then, but you do the Split series, bunch of 7-inches. So tell me if I missed any, but you do the No Reply Life's Halt, which is fucking amazing. Buried Alive, Reach the Sky, Death by Stereo, Ensign, Bane, Adamantium, Voorhees, Kill Your Idols. And yeah, so where did the idea for this come from? And do you think it was a good idea?
Yeah, absolutely it was. It was so fun. That happened still in the era when we had the Indecision Hotel. So we had bands staying at the house like literally every night. You'd just come home and just like, oh, this band is staying here, you know? And through that, like there were so many people that I had become friends with, you know, all these bands that were on other record labels that all kind of wanted to like, man, it'd be fun if we could do something on Indecision, you know? I'm like, yeah, that would be awesome. And that Split series ended up kind of being the way for that to happen. And we were able to kind of tie almost all of those splits into summer tours. So like the Life's Halt, No Reply was for we made that and they had it ready for their summer tour that they did together. Buried Alive and Reach the Sky did a tour together, and had that record.
Yeah, they played Laser Star and Oxnard.
Yep. And then Bane Adamantium, they toured that summer together. It was actually Bane Adamantium and Death by Stereo doing it. And then, the Death by Stereo Ensign, kind of like as a request from Ensign, they wanted to do one more record on Indecision, and they loved Death by Stereo and really wanted to do it. And Death wanted to have a record out as well for that tour. So we did that. The only one that kind of doesn't fit in that mold, although it was supposed to, was the Kill Your Idols Voorhees, because that wasn't originally supposed to be Voorhees.
What was it going to be?
It was supposed to be Kill Your Idols and Indecision, which I remember having a conversation with Justin Brennan. Like we were excited, like, wow, like it's finally going to happen. Like Indecision's going to do a record on Indecision. And, I was excited just for that. But something happened. I think that might have been right around the time they broke up, and it was, before they started up Most Precious Blood. But Kill Your Idols still really wanted to do a split. And they came to me and said, hey, what would you think about doing us and Voorhees? And I mean, I I was already familiar with Voorhees. I dug them, and I was like, man, that'd be kind of interesting. Yeah, and they're really like the only like European band that ever really recorded for Indecision.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how that one happened. But yeah, originally it was supposed to be Kill Your Idols and Indecision.
Well, both are cool. That would have been a cool thing, and then but the Voorhees Kill Your Idols is cool, and I think they they toured together. No.
They might have not. I didn't see it. I've actually never seen Voorhees play.
Okay, either that or Andy just used to always wear a Voorhees shirt. I don't know.
That's probably the case.
Yeah. Also in the year 2000, you do one of the best albums on Indecision, which is the Count Me Out 110. And how do you come across these guys?
They had actually already done an EP on Ambassador, I think. Ryan and Steve Hertz's label. And so I was already familiar with them. And a couple of the guys were playing in Time Flies who were already on Indecision. And they had recorded that LP. I don't know if Ambassador was supposed to put out 110 or if they just recorded it with like kind of, we don't know what we're going to do with it. But it was recorded already. And the guys in Time Flies were like, hey, like Colin and Charlie got this other band, Count Me Out. We really think you should put it out. You should hear it. I said, okay, yeah, send me it. And they sent it to me, and I was like, what? Like,
yes, please.
I couldn't believe they'd been sitting it. Like, they kind of like, kind of like casually, like, just like, it's like, another band that we're doing. And I heard, I was like, holy crap. Like, I fucking love this, And that's really how it happened. Like, that record was already in the can by the time I got brought in. And it was just kind of like a nonchalant conversation. Like, hey, what would you think about doing this? I was like, hell yes, I want to do this.
Man,
and I love that band. They like we talked about it on that other podcast, but they're a band that like truly never got the love that I feel like they deserved.
Yeah, I wonder if there'll be a resurgence of that. Like, you just re-released the LPs, so there's no time like the present. Everyone needs to go, and Daniel writes for both of them, so you should really listen to both of them. They're probably both awesome. The second one didn't connect with me the way that the first one did, but it still sounded really good. I remember listening to it in the van.
That's interesting you say that. I feel like more people have told me that the second record connected with them more than the first.
Oh, it's just the production on the first one is like, it's one of the best sounding hardcore records of all time. Like,
you think so? Wow.
There's something in the water in DC that day when they recorded with them. Like, the production is untouchable, and like, there's so many like little intricacies in that record. Like, I always call it like the Blue Oyster Cult breakdown that they do it. Like, it's one of the later tracks where it cuts out and it's like ding 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 ding.
I know.
Ding. And
I know the part you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like, oh my god, like that's so sick, and it comes in on the toms like full Youth Crew style, and like it's melodic without being like, I don't know, because I'm not a big fan of melodic hardcore, but these guys, and actually the next band that we talk about, like they take it to the limit of where like I get it in the feels. I absolutely love it. I love this record, and yeah. So if people haven't heard Count Me Out, like you should listen to it. It sounds like, I mean, the recording is so fucking good. So yeah, it's like there's no datedness on it. Like it sounds like it could have come out yesterday, I absolutely love it. But yeah, totally underrated band that people should check out, as well as Faded Grey, Quiet Time of Desperation, my favorite Indecision release, and sounds best on gray vinyl, which I still have. And I absolutely love this record. I assume that you knew Lance for a long time before this.
Yeah. I mean, that's really how it happened. Me and Lance were already really good friends, and I don't really remember exactly how the conversation went, but at some point we had like a conversation, and he was like, "Hey, I got this band, Faded Grey. We want to do a record. I really just want to do it with you. If you don't want to do it, I understand, but the only person I want to do a record with is you." And yeah, of course I'm doing that, and it just so happened that the band ruled and they were awesome people. So it was like this perfect combination of everything. Like I I really love that record. And I remember when we were talking about what they were trying to do with the record before it was actually recorded, trying to what do you guys do? Do we want to try to go here? Do we want to try to go there? Like, what are we looking for on the record? And all Lance said is like, I just want to do a record that's crucial. I don't care about anything else about it. And that kind of stuck with me. And I think he did it. I think it's a crucial record. I think all those songs they're greater than the record's greater than the sum of its parts. You know, it's a great record.
Yeah, I love it so much. It's one of the records that, like, I don't know. I fall in love with a lot of records, obviously, but for some reason, my favorite records are the ones where I like side B more than side A, because like people kind of try to front load their records sometimes, and a lot of times, like the first handful of songs are the best songs, but then when you can connect with the second side of the record, it just feels like so special, you know. And like this record is one of those. Like, I just absolutely love it. And then talking about, like, you know, you putting out your friends' records, like, there's no better feeling in the world when your friends' bands don't suck. You know?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh my God, I'm buddies with this guy and his band actually rules. Like, fuck yes.
I used to reflect on that like all the time. Like, man, how lucky I am. Because I'm not someone that's out there like, I'm not going to shows looking for bands. Who can I sign? That kind of stuff. I just happen to like do all my friends' bands, and I lucky enough that I have this talent pool around me that are just like gifted and do things that I love and do it right. And you know, it's dumb luck. Believe me, it's not me. I wasn't doing anything correct. You know, I just happened to surround myself with awesome people. You know, on a little side story on that Faded Gray, when that record came out, that was when Revelation still had like not a whole office full of like salespeople. There was probably like 2 or 3 people that handled like store accounts, because there was enough stores that you couldn't have people that handle accounts. And there was a guy that worked there. His name escapes me now, but he was all in on that like Death Cab for Cutie, like emo scene. And Faded Gray have that song Emo Solution on the record, and it made him so angry. He wouldn't sell any of them. So I even remember like kind of having like a conversation once with Vic. I think she was working there already at that time, and she's like, "Hey, this guy's not gonna like submarine my record, is he?" And she's like, "No, he won't." But it's just like he was so bothered by it. You would have thought like it's not like they're, you know, bulldoze. You know what I mean? It's just like,
right.
They're like, these are guys that would go to emo shows. You know what I mean? Like, but it was like this guy was so upset by the Emo Solution.
Which is ridiculous, because if you read the lyrics, like, they're really well thought out. It's like,
of course,
this guy is actually writing better lyrics than your emo bands, dude.
Oh, for sure, sure.
It's so funny. But yeah, you talk about being surrounded by talent. I think everyone would be disappointed if I didn't bring it up. And in 01, you do In Control Another Year, which has never been which we've never been accused of oozing with talent. But we always paid you back, so I'll take that.
Yeah.
I don't owe you $1. I don't think. Do I?
No, okay. I don't think so.
Yeah, we always took that very seriously. We always gave you our money. So, if we're remembered for nothing else, I would like it to be that. A band that honored its debts. So. And
a band of real dudes, you know? I mean, here we are doing your podcast. It's not like this is the only time you and me ever have interactions with each other, you know? Like, this is a friendship now 2 decades in, you know? If there's any kind of like mark that you could kind of give a band where like, was this signing a good idea? Was putting out this record a good idea? Like, if I still talk to those guys, they're still my friends.
Right.
That's a good check mark, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I still consider Ryan.
And you were a good band. I know. It's the, whenever you talk about your own band, you kind of, because I do the same thing with, you know, the record label. You kind of become self-depreciating a little bit, but like In Control fucking brought it. You know, I mean, if besides just paying me back, you know, you guys never had a boring show. At least not one that I remember.
No, we killed it to those 8 people in El Paso every night. I mean, I would hope they didn't walk away bummed, like that. I mean, that was something we brought, but yeah,
Being able to still be excited to play when there's 8 people there is a skill set that not anyone can have. That's a litmus test for how much you really want to be there.
well, it's not their fault that they don't have a scene, or maybe it is, but like they went out, right? Like they showed up, so why should they be punished for not having 100 friends? Like maybe they are like a legit like hardcore loner, that like went out to the show because they're into it. Like I know what that's like, like to be into stuff that other people aren't into or whatever. Like I don't know. I just whatever. I mean, we're fortunate enough that Nard like it has a heavy history. It's got lots of times of being like a poppin' scene, but then I also know the other side of it where, for the hardcore scene, there like there was a time that we kind of built it from scratch. Because we existed like adjacent to everything else. Like it was its own like little carved out thing. And I mean, I take a little bit of credit for like kind of bringing it together, too, with like merging it back up with like the Missing 23rds and the Ventura scene. It's like everyone now, it's like one big happy family, which is fucking great. It's what I always wanted. I never had a piece of like the drama. I was just like, I was just on a side because I was on a side. But hey, what are you going to do? But yeah, that's interesting though, Dave. Like, because you've been around for so long, you've seen so many people come and go. Like, how do you can you do a smell test? Like, when you met me, or when I was like, I really want to be on Indecision. Like, did you know? Like, or were you like, who is this guy? Like, he's gonna be like, here today, gone tomorrow. Like, how do you sniff people out to know if they're being legit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is a little bit of like a sixth sense on that kind of stuff. Because there's definitely bands that people, ask me about after the fact, like, hey, how come you never did this band? And it's like, well, the reality, I never did that band because we never had a conversation about it. But, also like, I kind of got a feeling from that guy, like, this dude's not the real deal. Like, this is a passing phase for him. He's going to be gone in a year, which, life happens and people disappear and people go on to other things, but like, I remember the conversation that you and I had before, we agreed to do the record, and I mean, you were bleeding sincerity over it, like, maybe to you, it felt like you were coming to me with like, here's a list of things that, you don't have to worry about. We have a van, we have this, we'll pay you back. We do this, like all that stuff was great, but I could sense that you just really wanted to do this. And that's the first step. There's bands that I talked to that ended up being very popular and probably would have been very good signings for Indecision, and as far as, name recognition and selling records and stuff like that. But they were just like, what can you do for us? What can you get us? How much can we get for this? What can we get for, like, I was never interested in giving people deals, like, it's just like, you want to do a record with me? I want to do a record with you. Let's figure out all the rest, And I got that feeling from you right away. I mean, there's a few bands I've had conversations like that. I mean, I've probably been wrong here and there, but not in any great capacity.
I can name one. You should have signed Modern Life. Yeah, you should have signed Modern Life is War. I pitched them.
I never had a conversation with those guys myself. Like I never actually.
No, we went to lunch.
Met them. We did?
Yeah.
When?
We went to breakfast or lunch together.
With Modern Life is War?
Yeah, swear to God.
Wow, I don't have any recollection of that. How crazy is that?
You must have been drowsy. You should have had 2 coffees, Dave.
Oh, man, I have no recollection of that whatsoever. Wow.
That's the only band I ever pitched to you, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I should give credit. Thank you to Daniel for like bringing us up at least. Like, but that was a weird ass conversation because I didn't know you that well outside of like a hi, Yeah. And then like Daniel's like, I think Dave might be interested. You should call him, because I had all the money saved up and we were going to put out our own record. But I had that chunk of money, and it's like, if I can get someone else to do this record, I can buy a van, And that was the conversation. So as soon as he agreed to the record, we went out and bought a van. And the van
Wow.
lasted us our whole band. So it was great. And then we sold it to Spencer, who's a Santa Cruz hardcore stalwart that did at that time he was doing Over the Top was his band. But he promoted a bunch of shows. He booked like our shows up there and shit. So it was still in hardcore when I sold it, which is cool. And then he told me what band he sold it to. And then, yeah, I saw him that night that I saw you at Program. And he was giving me the whole lineage of where the In Control van ended up at or whatever. But pretty funny. Yeah, I had to sell it finally because we broke up and it got towed twice. And I was like, I just can't have this thing anymore.
I've lost more than one van that way. You know, where like a band broke up, or you know they weren't doing much, and they just like left it on the street, and it got towed, and whoever's house it was in front of just like never told anybody else, and like, hey, where's that van? Like, oh, it got towed like 3 months ago. What?
Oh, it's brutal. Yeah. So
Yeah.
on the Dano topic, let's talk about Over My Dead Body. This is the same time. Do you remember how this project got brought to you? They did a demo, and then you did the first 7-inch No Runners. Then you did both LPs. Do you remember how they came to you?
I honestly don't. At least I don't remember any specifics. If I had to take a guess, it would have to have been through Rob. You know, I mean, I had known Rob for such a long time, and you know, that man's family to me. So any band he would do, I would be game before I ever even heard it. You know,
Sure.
but I assume that he's the one that brought the idea to me originally, and
Yeah.
you know.
And these records are cool. And they went out and they did it. They went and toured with bands and so forth. They got a little bit of the unbroken rub and got to get on good tours.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
they don't have like a, you know, an extensive history of like, you know, they're not Black Flag, you know, but they went out to the East Coast a couple times, you know, went to Europe, you know, did the West Coast. Like they did. There was never like I mean, obviously I would want the bands to tour as much as they possibly can, but I'm not expecting anyone to be on the road, you know, 9 months out of the year, you know, like, and that was like something for me, like after, because Ensign was on tour almost year round, and it wasn't beneficial to me financially, you know, so even in that sense, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want a band that's not popular enough to be touring year round, because I can't really afford to do it. I mean, when Ensign was on the label, I could only afford to do, I mean, afford is a comfortable way of saying it, but you know, they were the only band that like I could even come up with enough money for them to be even doing stuff. I mean, You see the explosion as soon as Ensign was off the label. It's like I picked up like 5 bands right off the bat, you know?
Yeah.
I was able to like kind of to spread those resources. And that was one of those things that, you know, is really something that you have to learn to survive the long run, is being able to like manage your resources. Like there are going to be times where like you can't justify this or you can't justify that, and you have to have expectations on this, you know, but if you do manage those resources and you're honest with everybody, you know, I feel like it works out the best that it can.
Yeah, it's just fucked up that, like, in a roundabout way, we can credit Noodles for the late 90s OC hardcore explosion. That's kind of a bummer.
Noodles?
Yeah, because if he wouldn't have taken Ensign off your
It's true.
off your shoulders there, then you wouldn't have done the Adamantium, the Throwdown, and the Death by Stereo, which blew up OC in the late 90s.
That's true. It could have been a completely different path for the label. Who knows?
So, anyway, shout out Noodles, OC Hardcore MVP.
Weirdly enough, the neighborhood I live in here in Garden Grove, the local high school is where Noodles and his brother went to school.
Oh, and also wasn't the Offspring like operation right next door to Rev?
Nitro was like across the street. They were on Gothard as well, but they were like across the street in another warehouse. And then they actually moved to Garden Grove, kind of near where the Indecision Hotel was.
Okay,
Because I actually used to go pick up records there.
cool. One thing you get to do, I didn't put the date, but it's kind of cool because you got to put out Ito's band, who's one of your best friends, the Welcome to Your Life EP. Cool record. And
Yeah, I mean, that was
him meshing
matter
up with
matter of Go
well,
ahead.
Is him and the singer Show of Hands, who I'm spacing on his name.
Steve.
Steve. Shout out Steve.
Yeah, it was him and Steve, and then the guitar player VJ was already on Indecision because he actually plays on the Bleeding Through record that I did.
Okay.
So weirdly enough, they have like a Bleeding Through connection. But yeah, I mean, Ito lived at the Indecision Hotel. He was unofficially probably the only employee the label ever had. I say unofficially because it's not like he ever got a paycheck. It was more like, okay, you get dinner. I pay for dinner. I pay for a part of your rent this month if you do this, or little things like that. Right. Piecemealing out little duties for him. But yeah, like he put in a lot of effort into Indecision. How could his band not be on Indecision? It would have been weird,
Yeah, that would have been a weird one if it came out anywhere else, right?
Yeah, it'd be very strange.
Yeah, and then we should say that Dave got his Alan Goa's black belt. Have you gotten your black belt yet, Dave?
Yeah, I should be getting this year. I'll have my second degree on my black belt.
Oh shit!
So yeah, it's been 6 years. 6 years ago, I got a black belt.
And
But weirdly enough, like the original Indecision hotel roommates was myself, Kevin Finn, and Dave Ito. And as far as like consistently like going to jujitsu, like Kevin was like the first of us to like, okay, I'm gonna actually go to this school and go every few times a week. And then I was second in that line, and then Ito was the last one in line. And then the black belts have gone literally the other way. Like Ito was the first one to get a black belt, then me, and then Kevin is still a brown belt. And I think he's been a brown belt for like, I don't even know how long, probably like 9 years, maybe 10, like he's been a brown belt he's never actually gotten it. But yeah, we went in the complete opposite order that it should have happened. Ito's a line jumper.
Who is Finn under?
What's that?
Who is Kevin Finn under?
He got his brown belt under, I think, Sean Williams.
Okay.
He kind of jumped around because he was training at Hickson Gracie's Academy in L.A., and then he moved to Chicago for a while and trained out there, and then moved back out here and was training with some of the guys that used to be at the Hickson Academy. And yeah, I don't know. And now he's training with, I don't even know, Cobrinha maybe. He's kind of been all over the place. You know what? If it's not Sean Williams, he might have gotten his brown belt from Sean Patrick Flannery, which is the guy from Boondock Saints. He played Powder.
Oh, how about that? And who's he a black belt under?
If it's not Hickson, it was one of Hickson's black belts.
Okay.
Marcio, I think.
Okay.
I believe that's, or maybe he might have been a brown belt when he opened up the academy, and Sean Williams might have given him a black belt. I can't remember, but that was his partner when they first started that gym. But it's still pretty cool if you got your black belt from the dude from Boondock Saints.
Yeah, totally. That's a side note. We'll get to that stuff. I wanted to quickly mention Stay Gold. I thought that those records were Indecision standouts, and it's a shame that they didn't do more. They're a band that broke up too early for sure, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, there was, I think some internal strife amongst them. Guys can be the best of friends until they go out on tour, and the time that you have to be kind of understanding for your friend is at its all-time high, and you just don't have the capacity for it. I think tour is what kind of might have killed that band, to be honest. And I know that they did a summer tour that, wasn't promoted great. I don't know who we had book it, but, you've been on tours before where, a bunch of shows fall through. It's discouraging. And, if not everybody is on board with being like, whatever about it, it can get bad, you know? I don't specifically remember any kind of like blowout for those guys, but I had the feeling that it was like pressures on tour kind of made maybe a member or two realize like, I don't know how much I want to do this full time, you know?
Yeah. I should start a consulting firm of bands that want to survive bad tours. Because I got some advice, you know? So I'll give some away for free.
They were never blessed with a great recording either.
No, but nothing terrible. But yeah, you're right. Like they could have. Yeah, you're right. I do want to say for
the LP in particular, like that was one. You know, like I remember even at the time because that record was coming out when they were already kind of like, we don't know how much longer we're going to last. You know, and they were not happy with the mix on it. I think maybe the record kind of got rushed. Not even necessarily by them, but just in the studio, things weren't clicking. The mixing didn't go well, and then it was like you get the final recording, and you're sitting there listening. You're like, ugh, we got to fix this. It doesn't sound good. And then it's just like, do we want to fix it? You know, like, and once you're kind of at that point where you're kind of, I just want to get this done. That's not good. You know,
it's not a good way to ever feel.
Believe me, if we had the actual 2-inch unmixed reels, believe me, we would have done a new version of it by now. But I think those reels are gone.
Yeah, and maybe the 7-inch sounds better than the LP, but they should have re-recorded also off that first 7-inch, that TGIF song. I think it was on their demo and on that first 7-inch. It's like that song is so fucking good. They should have like done Face to Face Disconnected and put it on every record. You know.
That's actually a record. That's a record too that was already done by the time it came to me. I wasn't originally supposed to put it out.
Everything.
It was. Go ahead.
No, just everything's good about that record. Everything's good about the record. Like the artwork on it is like, if they would have gone on to something bigger, like even the artwork could have been something kind of semi-iconic.
Mm-hmm.
But what are you gonna do? So the record came to you. Who was going to do it originally?
They had actually sent me a demo, and I heard it, and I loved it because I felt like, this is like a mix of a few bands that I really like, but like no one really kind of sounds like this, and there's not that many bands that like I picked up on demos. You know, most of the bands on the label were comprised of people that had already done records on the label or were kind of in our inner circle, you know, even like something like In Control, you know, Daniel, you know, talking to me about In Control or something like that. That's how you get on, you know. It's not like, let's send a demo and see what he says, you know, like that stuff. I've always thought, man, that's hard to like just hear a demo and decide like, this is what I want to be a part of when you don't know these people and that sort of stuff. So, but Stay Gold is the kind of an exception to that rule. I had gotten that demo and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And, I had reached out to some people up in Washington that I knew and asked them if they knew any of these guys. And yeah, they said they're really great guys. So I said, okay, I'm gonna reach out to them. So I had reached out to them and they're like, oh, well, we're already doing a 7-inch coming out on maybe it's Mankind or Ammunition. I don't remember the order of Igby's labels, but Igby was going to put out the record. And like the 7-inch, and I said, okay, well, let's talk about it, you know, maybe full length later. And they're like, okay. And then, you know, I think it was probably like within a day or two, I got a call back from them, and they're like, hey, do you still want to do the 7-inch? I was like, yeah. What's going on with that? They're like, he doesn't have the time or money to do it. So I went and talked to Igby. I said, hey, what's going on with the Stay Gold? He's like, oh, you want to do it? And he basically just handed me over the record. I paid him back for it, like whatever he had put into it, and that's how I ended up getting it. Kind of strange.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, the first one they did was on Anchor out of Canada, and then you did the second one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think those were like came out the same time.
They might have. And
I think they might actually be the same recording.
Or that 7-inch.
I don't know.
That 7-inch might be the demo. Who knows?
There's the demo. They basically like they have those 7-inches, and then like maybe they're like 3 songs a piece, And then to make them like a 4-song and a 5-song, they took songs off the demo to put on both of the 7-inch.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a weird history for all those songs.
Yeah. O2 also, seminal Indecision band, You Do the Suicide File. And these are some of the best Indecision records for sure. Because there's not a bad Suicide File song. They just they kill it.
And I think they're a band that you hear the record and you're like, yeah, it's good. And then you see them live and you go back and you listen to that record and you really understand how good it is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. They were killer live. And I love to listen to the record still. So this is just a great, great band. This great part of the catalog. I wanted to talk about in the early 2000s, like something that's it's kind of totally washed over in history because it went away and then it came back. But can we talk about like vinyl just died completely? Was that a slow fall off, or did it happen overnight, or how would you describe what happened?
I don't know if I'd call it like a slow fall off. And I don't even know that it necessarily died outright. A lot of like the trend, because I mean, we did this obviously, started having other labels do like vinyl licenses of your releases. And there's a couple different reasons that we do this. One, the label was busy. I was putting out a lot of records, spending a lot of money on, advertising and all other kinds of things that you have to do, and, tour vans and this and that. The money that you got to lay out beforehand for a release to put out on compact disc, vinyl, even some of those earlier ones I even did cassettes of, which I wish I would have had extra copies of like 5 years ago when people were buying old cassettes, which destroyed me because I probably threw half of those in the trash. It was just expensive. So it's like when I have like 3 or 4 releases all on deck at the same time, to have to press all of them on multiple formats was pretty taxing financially, So having someone else take maybe the burden of the most expensive to produce format, because CDs were really the only reason that like the label was functional financially. It was this kind of weird era where CD was king, and it was something that you sold for slightly more than the vinyl version, but it actually cost less than the vinyl version to make. But even on like a smaller quantity of records, you can make enough at an independent label, to pay the bills, which is incredible, because you couldn't really do that with just straight vinyl. But more so for me, it was being able to not have to pay for, if I have 6 records coming out, that's 2 formats a piece, that's 12 formats that I have to work on. I can get 6 of them done and then license out the other one. So me personally, I still get the satisfaction because I want the vinyl. I'm not keeping any of the CDs. Yeah. I want the vinyl for myself. And the way I looked at it too is like most of the labels I did that with were younger startup labels and maybe didn't have the ability to like, how do I sign a band? How do I do this? So, I mean, I walked them through almost everything. I think besides maybe the Promise record that Death Wish did the vinyl for, I think, and Death Wish wasn't Death Wish at that time, even when I did that, but like the Death Wish that is today. But most of those vinyl releases, I still did the layout for. I got the masters ready for them and said, here, you need to send this to here, you need to send this here and that there, and that's that. I kind of helped them do it, and for a lot of those labels, that was still early on in their existence, and I felt like it bred this like community feel. I'm not in competition with anybody. I've never felt that way. I'm not competing for bands or anything like that. Like to be able to have like a partnership on a release is cool, like to be able to do the Over Dead Body record with Scott from Takeover. It was cool because I like Scott, and to be able to do, In Control with Martyr and even like When Tigers Fight I did with Closed Casket early on in their existence. And, that I just think that was cool, like especially when some of like the labels that had been coming up with that all signed, bigger Sony distribution deals, like there was competition. There wasn't between them, like I didn't care. I was never in competition with them. I just wanted to do cool stuff with cool people. And, I'm not signing, Scott's band. He doesn't, I don't think he had a band, but I got to do a release with him. Like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's the way I looked at it.
Yeah,
it wasn't even so much that vinyl was dying and I didn't want to touch vinyl, because I still wanted vinyl, because even I want to say maybe right before that era, I was still doing Death by Stereo's vinyl licenses, from Epitaph. Like I liked doing the vinyl, but it was also a way to kind of alleviate some of the financial hardship to keep the label going and do something cool with other people and, have a relationship there.
Yeah, the best thing about you having Martyr do the LP for the second In Control record was I got a Madball test press out of it. So, because he ended up doing a Madball 7-inch, and so I was like, I need one, please.
Awesome! Just figure out what the current Discogs value of that is, and just PayPal me half.
It doesn't matter the value because I'll never sell it. Like, when am I ever going to come across another Madball 7-inch or another Madball test press? But yeah, what are you gonna do? I think another notable thing is, this is more on the later side of Indecision, but one of the things you've done such a good job of is putting together discographies. So like, even we've talked about Suicide File, you did that one comp thing of putting their stuff together, but like, for instance, you did the Instead, you did Unbroken, you did Undertow, Mean Season, you did the Outspoken CD, recently the Hard Stance. What goes into doing a project like this? And is it partially like you just wanting to have like it's a nice one-stop shop where someone can like really figure out the history of a band?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of that. I just like doing cool projects, it's not so much about putting out records and selling records. It's about doing cool projects and hopefully other people dig it as well. And, that's a lot of different discographies you mentioned. So, I mean, there's different stories amongst all of those, probably very different from one to the other.
Well, sure.
But a lot of it too was, some of those were done in the CD era, where a lot of those bands only had, vinyl releases or CD releases that were no longer in press. So it's kind of cool to kind of make something new out of it, rather than just like repress this record and repress this record.
Sure.
But I mean, I'm a completist. I mean, you know that about me. So like being able to like put together like these giant discographies, with like 44 songs or 50 songs or however much it is, was always so much fun. And I really tried to look at it not in the sense of like we're making this compilation of stuff as like a greatest hits, discography project, or not project, product. More so like this is a yearbook for these guys,
Right.
This is something that they spent their entire youth on. Like, let's make this cool, like I want you to be able to look back through this booklet, and just be like, oh, I remember this. I remember, you know what I mean? Look at all my friends in these photos. Like that's how I looked at a lot of those discographies. Cause, outside of, a select few and maybe some new people that latch onto it, like the people that is going to mean the most to are the guys in that band, they're not doing a record so they could go out on tour. Like we're doing this as kind of, something to encapsulate this magic moment in their life, and despite what, people might think about some guys who've gone on to have bigger and better things, man, they always love those first things they did. That holds a special place in your heart forever, even if it wasn't good,
Yeah, I think it's so rad because, a lot of times when, obviously the bands you've done the discographies of, they're older now. And when you're young, only certain people collect stuff. And even if you do collect stuff, you move around so much that maybe you lose it. So it is rad, like for them to get something a little later in their life that like encapsulates everything. You know, it's like I don't know. I think it's super rad. I love it. I think we should jump over MMA just because we've gone 2 hours already, and I'm scared that we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it for 2 hours. But maybe we should do a bonus pod at some point because then all that stuff gets plucked out and people can decide not to listen to it because this is a hardcore podcast.
Right.
And we're total nerds about that stuff.
Okay.
Although I would like to know, like, what do you? So for the people that don't know, Dave does like photography for MMA for a long, long time, and got to go to some of the most seminal events like in the history of the sport. Although you weren't there at Ultimate '96, but
No.
to see Don Frye's best night, even better than UFC 8. But what was like the best event you were at? Like in feel of like anticipation, delivered. And let's talk about Japan first. So would it have been the Fedor Crow Cup?
Yeah, that was a pretty special event. Like to be like, you know, in an arena with that's holding like 50, 60,000 people, which is much bigger than a UFC was. I mean, that's bigger than a UFC is now, but back then even more so. You know, like those early Vegas UFCs, almost everybody that went to that like had some kind of like connection to like the sport. You know, like they trained or they were a trainer or they were a fighter or they did jujitsu. You know, it wasn't really like a lot of casual fans making up those crowds. But Pride, there was none of that. It was straight up fans, 50, 60,000 people in there, dead silent. It's just like this kind of culture shock that you've heard about, but you're not ready for until you get there. It was pretty surreal to be there. And especially, you know, a lot of those people that fought in Japan, I'd only ever gotten to see fighting on TV, you know? So like, and the one you're specifically talking about, the night that Fedor and Crow Cop fought each other, Kevin Finn actually went with me to Japan for that. And I got him a press pass and we were sitting in the press room and we're just sitting there and like, you know, Sakuraba and Gomi are just coming in and walking in. He's just like looking at what is happening? Like, I have no business being here, you know? Yeah. We were like still like super fans about it at the time. It was pretty neat. Like, and I know people talk about Pride now, you know, like it was, you know, some weird mystic thing. Like it's got this special place in like the cultural history of MMA, but I mean, it's that doesn't even do it enough. Like it was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and it would be hard to explain the build up like to the Fedor Crow Cup too, like how big it felt. Like because there's no like, you know, you see people later in their careers and so forth, and you know, Crow Cop never really did good in UFC, so like people just can't understand what that build up was, and for it to finally happen, you know, because it should have happened.
Oh, yeah.
Should have happened earlier, but they still were able to like make it happen. They met in their prime, and like
and especially something that was, you know, like everyone looked to the UFC as like these are the best guys in the world, and really the number one and number two at the time heavyweights in the world were having like the two best heavyweights in the world fight in Japan. You know, it was not in the UFC, and it was pretty. And if I'm remembering that card correctly, it's not like those were like the only marquee guys on there. I mean, Vanderlei Silva fought on that one, Shogun, Tank Abbott, I think, even fought. I think it was the last time Igor Vovchanchyn ever fought.
Yeah, it's like Tank Abbott's fighting Yoshida on like the undercard.
Yeah. Vanderlei Silva, Ricardo Arona was the first fight of the night. Like, you know, maybe that means nothing to like fans coming into the sport now, but like at the time, I was like, this is Vanderlei Silva's making the second walk of the night. You know, like that's crazy. This is like their reigning champion.
Yeah, it's just a part of time. It's so weird when I think about it. It's depressing to me because it's like my favorite sport like went away. You know, like I still watch MMA, but like it's never been the same since then. You know, and I mean, it's weird to think about the build up to that fight, like just how gnarly it was, because Fedor, like he he wrote the blueprint that night on how to beat Krokop, and Krokop was never really the same. Although he did have flashes of brilliance in like the open weight Grand Prix and so forth, which really is a culmination of his career. It's kind of like he was never great again after that night. Like maybe that was like his last hurrah, and maybe he shouldn't have even won that tournament, you know. But it was like there was something that left him after winning that tournament. I think maybe it's like the ultimate like emotional dump or something, just because that was the hump he could never get over. Like he was a guy that like never won a tournament, you know. Even in K1, he never won a tournament, you know. So I mean, never won the big tournament, but but yeah. So and then
but that was like Japan. Japan was something crazy, you know. Like that was otherworldly, and it was hard to not be a fan there. Well, also hard not to be a fan there because you know, the Japanese promotions didn't take gaijin like me seriously, like every single time. Even though I was working for like, you know, like the biggest magazine in Japan at some of those shows, they refused to give me a ringside photo spot. They've even taken it away from me at a Pride show before. Like once I checked in.
Yeah, we should say
But I mean, that's a Japanese cultural thing, you know?
Totally. That's why you couldn't go to the massage parlors either.
Yeah, I wasn't doing that.
That's me and my dark Googling history.
There was a thing, I remember that trip that Kevin went with me. There was a place right near where we were staying that we'd walk by every day, and it just said live kissing show. And every time we were looking like, what the hell is the live kissing show? And I remember we asked someone at like one of the press events, like someone that lived there locally, and I'm like, have you ever been to this live kissing? Like, what is it? And they're like, do not go in there. Do not go in there. I was like, all right, unless you're Yakuza, you do not go in that place.
Yeah. I don't know. You can never take advice like that. That's always where I go. Like one time I was with this girl and we were in a Uber ride share or something. We were in San Francisco, and this other couple was in there, and I can't remember what happened. We were telling some crazy story, and the guy turned around and he's like, "Oh, you think that's crazy?" Like one night I was at this bar like in I think it was the Japantown area of San Francisco. And he was like, it was crazy. Like we went in and people were smoking inside, and all it was gangsters and prostitutes and this and that. And we're like, oh, cool. Like sounds crazy, you know, whatever. He gets out of the Uber, and we're like, change of plans. Can you take us there? And yeah, so we went, and it was just like a normal bar, you know, like you could kind of smoke inside. It was like, you know, you walk down these stairs and they'd let you smoke in that little area outside the bar, but it was, you know, it was down the stairs or whatever it was like. And the bartender was very flirty, awesome bartender. And yeah, there was a couple dudes that were like sleeping in there, like whatever. It was like not that big of a deal, but I always like, you know, if someone tells you to not go there, just go there and see the scenery. But yeah, we shouldn't go that far in MMA because I don't know how much people want to know. But maybe we should. Yep. Maybe people should reach out and let us know how much they want us to talk about it, and maybe we'll do a Patreon pod of it. We can tell the story about how you snuck camera into the UFC when Sherdog was banned.
Oh yeah, that wasn't for Sherdog, but yeah, it was
MMA
definitely. No, that I actually snuck the camera in before the banned era, but yeah, I could always tell that story.
Yeah, we'll save it for the Patreon so you don't lose another credential. Now, just for the completist in the listeners, we should say we mentioned a Pride card. Can you say what the best UFC was that you ever went to?
The best UFC I ever went to. I can't really remember like full cards or anything like that at this point. But there's like moments that I remember. And they might not even be the most culturally significant or historical ones, but when BJ won the welterweight title, when he beat Matt Hughes, that was pretty special to see. You know, I mean, that was a big night for him. But really the one I kind of always come back to was when Vanderlei and Chuck fought, even though it was kind of a year or two after it should have happened. To be able to stand there in the arena and see Vanderlei do his walk and then stand in the ring waiting for Chuck to walk, and they turn the lights off for Chuck's walkout music, and Vanderlei's just in the dark, standing there, I don't know, 4 feet in front of me, doing that little wrist shake thing, with nobody looking at him. And I was just like, I cannot believe this is about to happen. It felt like it was one of those things that was never going to happen, and it did,
Yeah. Do you think that Vanderlei and Chuck would have been different if it was in Japan?
In Japan, for sure, it would have. I still give Chuck a really good chance. I mean, Chuck was a killer at that time, but Vanderlei on all of his vitamins at that era was frightening.
Well, in the ring, like Vanderlei couldn't corner him. It was harder. Like he hadn't worked that much with the cage, and not that like I don't know. I just felt he couldn't corner him, and Crocop might have had the same problems, a little bit. But
yeah, like he wasn't able to walk someone down and get him to the corner and throw that high left kick and watch him slide down the turnbuckle. When you have that as round, not that the UFC cage is round, because it's definitely not, but there's definitely a lot more of an area to slide out the side. Yeah,
because Vanderlei had his best success when he was able to like have his back against the cage, and then he could actually like kind of control the distance a little more. That fight was disappointing.
Yeah.
That fight was disappointing, in my opinion.
It was. I mean, like the fight itself wasn't great, but like I just think of that moment, like Vanderlei in the dark doing that wrist warm up. You know what I mean? With nobody looking at him. I mean, it was a UFC crowd. I don't even know how familiar they were with Vanderlei. But yeah, it was that was pretty exciting, and I got to see a lot of people win their first belts. I got to be there. And when Georges St. Pierre won a title, I got to be there when BJ won his first UFC title, and when Chuck Liddell won his first title, and those are pretty cool things to be there for, and I know that stuff still is happening now, but similar to music, you kind of get caught in an era that means the most to you, and even though by today's standards maybe some of those guys aren't the world's greatest fighters, they kind of capture an era that really had my interest.
Yeah. I feel you on like the build up to things, like being the special moments too, because like
when you have an event every week, like it's just kind of like that one happened, let's do the next one. That one happened, let's do the next one. Like that era of the UFC, they were doing 5 a year. So it's like you had long gaps in between them, and it's just like they had to load it up. If you got a spot on a UFC card, even like with the dark prelims when they still had those, where only the live audience would see like the first 3 fights,
you had to wait
like
for the
that
DVD.
was, yeah, like it was a big deal to get one of those spots. There wasn't many of them,
Yeah, I remember. I remember the anticipation, like, because MMA Weekly would like do the 10 fighters in 10 days or whatever. It was like 2 weeks of interviews, like leading up to the UFC. Like, yeah, it was wild.
Mm-hmm.
But even what I was talking about was you latching onto that Vanderlei moment in the dark. Like, I feel the same way about finally getting to see Sakuraba live, even though it was like the Hoist Gracie rematch. There was obviously a disappointing fight, but getting to see Sakuraba entrance is like, good God.
Oh yeah.
Thank God I got to see it. But yeah. Yeah, and for UFC moments, it's mine's not historically significant either. Although it was for the uncrowned lightweight title, but Eve Edwards, Josh Thompson, that kick.
Oh yeah,
and
that's right.
First fight.
Yeah, you sat there with Ito. You sat there with Ito at that one.
Yeah, and there was probably only like 3,000 people in the arena, and just like seeing that as like your first live fight like that was just like, Jesus Christ, like this is gnarly, But yeah. Let's if people want to hear more of that, hit me up and we'll go more, because you said we weren't going to talk about it, and we still probably did 25 minutes on it. So like we can talk about it forever because we're nerds of the era. So, or at least I'm a nerd.
Yeah.
You were a participator. So
no, I was a nerd, man. I love it.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. You are doing a handful of bands right now that I absolutely think are awesome. Well, I love the Bayonet 7-inch. Lots.
Mm-hmm.
I was so glad you did that one. That fucking rules. And then, of course, Rod of Correction. Shout out Greg from the pod. Totally rad project with him and Colin. And I should know everyone's name, but my apologies. And then Skullcrack is probably the most active band. Is that correct? I feel like they're always touring and playing shows.
I mean, I'm saying this a few months into a pandemic, so it doesn't feel like anybody's an active band right now. But yeah, I mean, they're down to play every moment that they're not working. You know.
Yeah, I feel like I just see them on like every fucking flyer, so that's super rad. Ursula, shout out Josiah. That was like a cool tie-in. I was like, oh shit, Josiah's on Indecision. That fucking rules.
Yeah, Josiah actually has a Stay Gold tattoo.
Oh, how's that for a stitch back?
Yeah, how's that?
Yeah, and then you just did the Power Alone record, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, do you still feel the same? Like you're excited about music as you were?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, you know, not to dip back to the MMA, but when I started getting my first paying gigs in MMA was right around the time that the CDs were starting to collapse, you know. The label wasn't quite making enough because, you know, for probably, I don't know, let's say 5-6 years, the label was my only source of income. And when I say only source of income, I wasn't getting a paycheck, but it was paying the rent on the house that we were all living in, and allowing me to do the label full time. Once record sales started dipping and that landslide started kind of happening, and it wasn't even, I wasn't trying to get out. It wasn't like, oh no, I'm not gonna be able to do this. It just, by dumb luck, MMA was starting to kind of come up. And I was actually getting offered like, hey, you know, we can pay you $300 to do this, or, you know, can you do this? We could fly you out for a week, and things like that. They just kind of like intersected each other, one on the way up and one on the way down. So I started taking more MMA gigs because I kind of had to for the money. And it became my job, and Indecision became a part-time hobby for me. But I never stopped doing it completely. But who would have guessed, you know, a year or two into my MMA tenure that the sport would blow up in the way that it did, where I was working every week, traveling every week. So I had maybe 1 or 2 weekends a year that I wasn't traveling, right, or didn't have like a local thing to do. So it basically removed my ability to go to shows. So for like a good decade, I would go to like a one show here, you know, a Tuesday night show here or a Thursday night show here, you know, like sprinkled throughout the year. So you don't feel as connected when you're not really seeing what's happening, you know? And then in 2017, Sherdog, who I had like a full-time job with, let me go. And for the first time in a long time, I started having weekends free to go to shows again. And it was pretty exciting, you know, because like everything was new to me again. I didn't know a lot of the people that were, I mean, this is a 10-year gap, you know, it's not like, oh, well, let's see, so-and-so's still doing it. Like, this is all new people and people that have been around for a decade that I just have missed, you know? And it was just so fun to kind of be able to just like enjoy it and love it again and just go to shows and take photos, which is what I always loved doing until it felt like a chore.
Yeah, and I think that it's also good timing with like the program Skate Shop, like starting to do shows, because it's like you get to see all these bands on like the realist level, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I don't know, it's like you're face to face with them. You can talk to them. You can see them. Like there's no them relying on like a nice sound system to sound good. It's just stripped down to this. It's like seeing someone at the PCH or the Shea, you know. And so like to come back into it on the realist like ground level is so cool.
Yeah, I mean that's the level I like. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I mean, if there's no community around it, then it's just fucking music. You know, like. What does that mean? You know, like Might as well just go see. I might as well just go see Oasis.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Gallaghers don't give a fuck about me.
True. But yeah. Oh, you know what? I skipped over your most important band, '06 Retaliate. But that's okay. That's okay. But yeah, I think that the MMA stuff is crazy. It did take you out of it for a little while, and it's just because of the travel schedule. Because
I know, but it was able to give me a really fresh perspective to coming back into it. You know, I don't know, being able to like just appreciate having a conversation with somebody at a show that I don't know. You know, and it's not like it doesn't take effort. You know, like it does take effort. You know, like I'm not. It's hard to like go to a show where you're, you know, the oldest person by a pretty large margin and you don't know anybody and there's already like these circles in there to just like stand next to someone and be like, "Hey man, I'm Dave." You know, like
right.
It's good for me, you know, and it's I don't know. That's what I love about hardcore, man. It's always been about the people. Like the bands are important and records are important but I don't know if the people aren't worthy of you having a conversation with at a skate shop, what's the point?
Yeah, no, I mean the community aspect is huge, and it's always been a spot to meet solid like-minded dudes. You know, I mean, like I've gotten a lot of lifetime friendships out of it. You know, so
yep.
So, but yeah, I'm so glad we got to do this. You're obviously one of the most important people in my journey of hardcore, enabling me to put out records. So. So glad to get you on here. I wanted to get you earlier, but it's hard scheduling and so forth, you know.
Of course.
But yeah, is there anything?
I'm glad I finally got to make it.
Yeah, me too. Do you feel like there's anything that we totally brushed over that we should have touched on, other than the MMA stuff?
Well, the MMA stuff I wouldn't even say we needed to brush up on any of it, but. No, I feel like we covered a lot of it, you know.
Okay. You feel like you've been well represented?
I do. I feel like I've been well represented.
All right. Appreciate that. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Dave.
Of course. Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.